are you?
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Very nice to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning or your evening, I think.
Yeah.
It's about 8 p.m. here.
Okay, right, 10 here. Yeah.
We were all just joking. We're all, for the most part, sharing drinks, and it's like, all right, we'll have
Ah,
drinks and coffee.
okay, excellent. Excellent. Yes, I was teaching a summer school in Italy actually last week, but of course here
Yeah.
in Melbourne. So, all the work without the drinks. I do get up at 5 for a concert though, so.
How has quarantine been? What's
Uh, I, you know,
yeah?
fine, fine for me. Terrible for loads of people. So yeah.
I was reading your post from I think it was the middle of quarantine about sort of the split-mindedness of writing and going between online school and university and trying to navigate teaching and lessons and planning, and then having to write a commission on the flip side and being able to just like decipher between those two rooms at any given moment.
Yes, and I kind of tied that to an experience that I had when I had a very young child. Being able to have sort of split screen attention. But I think that's kind of the new normal for lots of people. To kind of inhabit these multiple realities.
Right?
In the 24-hour news cycle, we do inhabit multiple time zones and realities simultaneously. It's quite extraordinary. Yeah.
It's a remarkable thing that we really can just open the laptop and enter. I mean, at least for this, it's 7 different spaces for all of us, and then you close the laptop again and it's all gone, which is both really exciting and really horrifying.
Mm, yeah. I mean, so much of my life, and I guess for you as well, is inside this screen, is on Zoom. Some of my students recently did a fantastic project actually working with the Sydney Dance Company, where a dance work was choreographed over Zoom and using the constraints of the situation, including using the frame of, this frame that we're in, actually using this as an architecture for the dance, and the dancers, with their iPhones being told, okay, yes, and take this, here's this, use this camera view, and then from above, and then, circulate, show us the room, all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of, it's also quite an amazing example of the way in which, no matter what constraints and difficulties we face, that there's always this very human thing of trying to kind of respond creatively to constraint, to limitations.
And you've been given in the course of your career some really hard to imagine projects, and some really immense spaces to deal with. When you get something like Book of Tibetan Dead, or Tibetan Book of the Dead, excuse me, where do you start? Like where do you begin with a space like that, with an idea like that?
Well, actually, a lot of my projects have really emerged out of serendipitous situations. So when I look at the projects that I've done, and thank you so much for looking at my work, I think very comprehensively. A lot of things have emerged just out of chance meetings with people, with artists, and the conversations that you might have, over a coffee, just start to spiral out. So it's not so much that I began with, big ambitious ideas. They just kind of creep up on you, and they grab you rather than the other way around. And it's like one thing leads to the other. These are threads that you become entangled with, and it's one of the things I'm really interested in. And I mean, I can see this the beginnings of it, really really early on. But now I give it a name, which is around ecological thinking. This idea that we are absolutely intimately entangled and connected symbiotically, with everything. There is no us in the world. We're all in it
Yeah.
together. Yeah, and so I think of creativity very much in those terms. And so when you say yes, how do you work with something like the Tibetan Book of the Dead? It's like particular interests in spiritual thinking and meeting particular artists and having musicians like the Illusion Ensemble to work with. It just kind of emerges out of that context. Yeah. So this idea that creativity is absolutely a distributed phenomena is something that's really marked all my projects.
You brought up something that actually Tim Rutherford Johnson first mentioned about you in our first interview. One of the things he said about, we talked about your work and some of the composers we were interviewing. He said, Liza's by far one of the most widely read composers, one of the most well-studied composers I've ever spoken to, because there's like, her interests are so diverse and her inspirations are from so many places. And looking across the map of your writing, you touch on everything from Sappho to Walter Benjamin. And I'm curious to know, if you draw inspiration, impetus, I guess we can call it, from those sources, those conversations, what are the elements you look for? Does it just come to you? Is just something speaks? Or are there particular things you're looking for, threads you're hoping to follow?
Yeah, I mean, reading for me is, I mean, I do work in academia, but a lot of the reading I do is not incredibly academic. God, that's a terrible admission, isn't it? What I look for, I look for pleasure. I look to be, transformed in some way, and I guess that's why poetry and philosophical writings have been absolutely key. I'm looking for connections, obviously, that can help explain ideas that are bubbling in my musical thinking, but also to experience some level of transformation, the sense that there's so much more out there than than we can ever know. So I'm flattered that Tim thinks that I'm well read, but I don't make any claims to kind of a super kind of academic level of understanding. It is a little bit more probably more random random than that, but it's led by pleasure, I have to say. Yeah,
I love that.
yes, but this aspect of having very wide interests and multiple subjects is also something that I kind of wrestle with to explain, because it's not incredibly analyzable as well, and when people try and pin you down in any one spot, you can really get stuck. And an interesting project I've been engaged with recently is with the eco-musicologist Joseph Browning in Britain. He was working in Oxford, now he's at City University London, and it's a project which is sort of trying to describe whole worlds in their multiplicity, and without necessarily boiling it down or getting too reductive, though of course language means that you already begin to reduce. The title of the project is a musical bestiary. And a bestiary is a medieval form which is like an encyclopedia of the world in the format of describing creatures. And often they're these very fantastical creatures, whether they're unicorns or griffins, these hybrid, mythical creatures often. And in the bestiary, it describes these animals, these creatures, in terms of appearance and environment, but there's always a moral, and it's within a Christian framework. So the moral is a way of aligning yourself to Christian teaching and how to live your life. But the format is really interesting, and so in our project we've tried to turn our framework of analysis from musical works and the usual kind of analytical sort of modes where you look at you know, pitch structures and rhythms and whatever, but to think about creatures in my work, and you can see how that lens is actually very suitable, because there are a lot of creatures in my work. There are these plants and animals and mythical things and ideas, and it's a way of kind of really drawing in all these seemingly disconnected, unconnected elements, and saying, yeah, they all operate in the music, and they speak to us through the music, as well as living in the world in different ways. And so it's really kind of breaking down the boundary between things which are ideas and imaginary fictional things and real things, and saying, oh, actually all of these things come together and do stuff. You know, they are on stage, they speak to audiences, they speak together with instruments and musicians and spaces in order to make music. So, sorry, that's a really long-winded way of trying to account for the multiplicity of subjects that are in my work, but has been a very necessary project to try and make sense of something, and instead of going, oh, but it doesn't fit into any framework, just trying to turn around, flip the problem and say, well, actually this is the strength. Yeah, which is a good ploy, I think.
And I love this idea of a bestiary. It's not one that we often, you know, speaking of academia, we are so trained to think in those boxes of music. And even in Darmstadt modernism, we still find boxes to pin things in. And so I love this. It's both very organic and very of the earth, but it speaks really nicely to your project as a whole, which I think is really striking. I love the use of the word. How does this idea of a bestiary, it's a very fantastical conception in many ways with the characters that are so often included. How does it relate to the more human version of myth, right? Because we get these sort of fantastical people that are meant to teach us morals on a human written level, right? We're talking about the restrictions of language, on a relationship of the human body to the world. You've tackled myth in at least 2, if you count Bruno Schultz, 3 of your stage works. I was curious about the human relationship of that same idea.
Yeah, I don't really separate it, I suppose. I mean, I think myth is a way of, you know, it's a modality for understanding, you know, things which can't be directly explained or pointed at. You know, it's symbolic languages for, you know, discussing and explaining to ourselves, you know, kind of various subconscious levels of being. I suppose the thing that I'm focused on is not so much human versus world, or it's hard to describe, I suppose, but that's why ecological thinking is kind of so central to this, which is to say, you know, we sort of co-create everything. It's trying to break down that language around inside and outside. It's to say that we're constantly binding to multiple things, you know, real things like this, you know, and this computer screen, you know, that are allowing our exchange and our ability to even, you know, to think and to articulate. You know, this very construction right now is creating our conversation in, you know, for me, in a very real way. And it's what I've always been fascinated with in music. You know, where does musical creativity come from? You know, it's absolutely emergent between, you know, the instrument and its histories, the musician and their histories, you know, myself, you know, everything kind of feeds into it. So that sense that there can be sort of these pure roles, it's kind of not like that for me, which is probably also a bit frustrating. But
yeah. In terms of your music, then, do you in building a world, I guess, a musical world. Do you find yourself creating similar bondings between content, between sounds, and their growth in simultaneity as one entity? I'm thinking of a piece like How Forests Think, which has, even in the body of your work, which still sounds like you, the whole work has its own sonic profile. But within the profile, there is this kind of binding that you're talking about of ourselves to objects, to entities, to nature, that exists in the music for me as well. I mean, I hear the relationship between lines, instruments, themes, ideas. Do you find yourself doing that consciously as a kind of world building?
I mean, sound for me has always been alive, you know, not just, and I think lots of musicians know that, and you know, sound is like the most magical, incredible stuff. You know, absolutely ephemeral. You know, we have no boundary against, you know, against it. It enters our bodies. It is this completely, you know, vibration. It's this completely transformational thing. And so when I'm composing, I am working with living stuff. And so this idea that things grow and start to bind to other things and then decay and then re-emerge, you know, that's how I think about the act of composing, but in a very visceral, you know, way. It's how I know sound, and it's how I work with sound. And so, but but there are certain kinds of sounds that I follow more, right? That are more active, that are have more vitality for me. And I always go for the shiny stuff. And it's why I love sort of noisy sounds, because for me there's more potential to transform, you know, and that there's this inner life. And so I'm kind of hunting, you know. I feel that this analogy of alertness that attends, you know, something like hunting, not just killing animals, but this sense of tracking and, you know, paying attention to many signals and going, oh yes, I'm going to prioritize that one, and you know, where that leads you and suggests other things. Yeah, that's very much how I think about music, how I listen to music, other people's music, and how I work myself.
I have to imagine that a place like Australia is full of natural versions of that process, being able to trace sounds that are completely, you've talked about not being able to hear the birds in Australia without being able to hear the dirt bikes.
You know, there are very few places which are free of you know, human noise. So I think that the world is rather quieter now. You know, you read about these extraordinary reports of animals, you know, kind of retaking cities, and dolphins, you know, in formerly muddy canals in Venice, and all this kind of stuff. But yes, Australia has, and particularly its bird life, has particularly raucous, aggressive sounding, noisy animals, which I absolutely adore. You know, so when someone says bird song, I don't think of birds tweeting. I think of, you know, these kind of, you know, aggressive, warbling, noise-filled, white noise sounds. That for me, you know, is what comprises bird calls. It's actually a fascinating book by Tim Lowe called Where Song Began, which is about Australian birds, and talking about how the aggression of Australian birds is because there's so much sugar in the environment. You know, they're so hyper.
And I love that idea of where song began, right? We're so trained in Western music to look at, you know, past Baroque music, looking at Renaissance music, and then looking at chant and looking at, you know, old folk songs as where did song begin? Song began there with the birds in Australia. I love that.
Well, it's a very ancient land, yeah.
As you were talking about this, animals and retaking cities that we've now plowed over, I couldn't help but think about your work as a whole. Animals sort of retaking the concert hall. retaking the opera stage, right, in spaces where for a long time they haven't been allowed outside of a purely musical reference context, right, where now it's moving beyond a reference. It's a language that's almost theirs in your writing. And that wasn't really a question, that was just a sentiment that I enjoy.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that goes back to that creature, framework, which, as I said, is very convenient. And there are these, the piece that I wrote in 2018, Extinction Events and Dawn Chorus, that has quite a number of animals in it. It has these fish that are part of the Dawn Chorus, and I love this idea that the fish make sounds and they're really active at dawn and dusk. If only we could really connect to that, we would have a completely different relationship to these creatures, and would have a completely different moral relation for a start. If we really understood how they're speaking, singing. Yeah, and so I guess the creature, these animals, and these plants, that kind of make their way into my music, increasingly so. For me, they speak to what I call, or what lots of people call, a post-human world, out the Anthropocene, times we live in, where humans have really kind of impacted the world at a global level. But the post-human is not that there are no humans, that perhaps is what is going to happen, but it's like decentering humans. It's allowing other creatures to absolutely have their space, their voice, their song.
And in dealing with these other creatures, and with both our times of us, of humans, and our interaction with and place in that Anthropocene, but also of times before humans and creatures that have been around longer than we have been by a long shot, you're dealing with a lot of really complex temporalities. This idea of what is the temporal existence of fish, right? And what's the temporal experience of the song of fish? You get into some really complex systems of time that we're not trained to think about. Musically, how you approach something like that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a huge question. That's a question that fascinates me. Because I think more and more, we're really confronted with these temporal spans. We just don't know. We can't conceptualize it. This sense of deep time that is just opened up and revealed when we're just confronted with so much species extinction. Trees that have lived for thousands of years that are in Australian forests that have been destroyed by bushfire. I mean, there were these extraordinarily catastrophic bushfires in Australia over the Australian summer, which is sort of from November to February. This absolutely sort of devastating, kind of absolute extinction events. That aspect of time, multiple temporalities, just as we are experiencing right now. Here we are in different parts of time cycle simultaneously, is something that I'm trying to look at very specifically in my work as a composer. And of course, music is something which is very much about materialities of time, both in terms of how they're represented and in our experience. It's really about perceptual time. And so over a number of works, looking at ways of thinking and working with different time flows. I mean, I'm not at all unique in this. I think many composers over centuries have been pondering the similar things. yeah, it's very much at the heart of the craft of composition is thinking about time, the passage of time. But for me, there's an extra element in that. For me, it's also wedded to thinking about the passage of so many beings in our world as well. Yeah.
I mean, I hear you in that. Yes, for centuries, music has been interested and fascinated by time, but there are so few composers I can think about who deal with it in such a earthly way as you do.
Earthly way.
lack of a better term, a relationship to the natural world, on such an honest level.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are loads of composers from John Luther Adams to, I can think of lots of examples. Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things that you deal with in this idea of extinction and these immense disasters that we so often cause to our world, you're also dealing with memory. Of species, of spaces. And it's not the first time that memory has played a significant role in your writing. But I'm curious now, after something like the Australian fires that we saw, how memory plays a role in that kind of music.
Yeah, I mean, time and memory. I mean, big topics and perennial sort of existential philosophical questions. Yeah, memory and how it's sedimented in story, in myths has been a really strong part of, subjects that I've tried to look at in my music. I'm really interested in not just memory in a very embodied way, because I think memories are passed down in not just in kind of externalized ways that we can more easily communicate. But I've always been very curious about what gets passed through us, what keeps coming through us, at ancestral sort of memory that is somehow still being expressed, and it's why myths and kind of epic kind of literatures have been very interesting because I think they hold those kind of those sort of really deep level memory cultures. That's one of the extraordinary things about living in Australia, because we have in terms of Indigenous culture, you're talking about a level of cultural connection which just goes back, as they say, time immemorial. It's just thousands and thousands of years. It's just this incredible multiple through multiple generations. And what's really interesting for me is the cultural tools that are found in Indigenous art making, storytelling, language, to maintain real accuracy of memory. You have songs which describe events that happened 20,000 years ago, right? Like a particular tsunami that happened, and people go, oh yeah, that's just a myth. But then, archaeologists are discovering, or geologists are discovering that actually these were events in time, and they're still being, kind of being held in the record of song and story. I mean, it really is mind blowing. Just the complexity. I mean, maybe I can just sort of try and point to a particular thing, because I just think it just staggers me the whole time. Here's an example, right? That the thylacine, which is the marsupial tiger, which went extinct on the mainland of Australia thousands of years ago. But the name for that particular animal is still held in the records of song cycles in places where it had disappeared, right? And even more, it plays a part in ritual, so that the tiger, which has these stripes, is connected to a particular fish which still exists, that is also striped, and so on and so forth. So you know, when you're talking about ecological thinking and connection and cultural meaning, you know, there you have just a kind of completely extraordinary example of, you know, I'm actually only telling a tiny part of this. This is knowledge that's been researched by an extraordinary linguist called, an anthropologist called Nicholas Evans. Yeah, you know, it's like every time I had a chat to him about this, but also read his work, I was just like, what? You know, if we only, you know, could appreciate that at a really deep-seated level, you know, our relationship to the world would be so different.
Right, the amount of waste and use that we have today. If we
Oh,
understand
yes.
what we like, what this world has seen, and the way in which it still manifests itself even now, we would treat it very differently.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and indigenous cultures are absolutely, you know, kind of treated in the worst possible way all around the world, as we know. So, yeah.
You mentioned this idea of embodiment, of this sort of transference of identity through genealogies and over long stretches of time. I'm curious how that informs this idea of ventriloquism that you talk about. You've written about it in some of your work, and it reminded me of ventriloquism is a little more of a for play or for show form of this idea of embodiment, of cultural embodiment. But I'm curious if I can make the leap between the two.
Yeah, it's only 10:30 a.m. and we're moved through quite a lot of topics here. Yeah, ventriloquism. Yeah, I mean that again is this extraordinary. One of the aspects of ventriloquism I'm really interested in is how, again from the point of view of emergent meaning, is that it very much relies on the interaction and projection, yeah, of the audience, right? You got to believe that that puppet can speak, and so that aspect of you don't believe but you do believe. You know that that puppet is inanimate, but you're still going to believe. You're going to still get freaked out by that, you know, that sense of the inanimate becoming animate. That's actually the part of ventriloquism I find particularly interesting. So the trick aspect of it, and the to and fro between, you know, it's a fraud, but you still are completely sucked in by it. And we see that, of course, at play. I mean, you know, in the media. I mean, like politics is all about ventriloquisms, right? Totally. Yeah. You as soon as you think about it, you go, whoa, you know, what's going, you know, I don't need to spell it out, I think. But that kind of ordinary, what I call sort of ordinary magic, right? This ordinary enchantment. So this enchantment that is not some kind of, oh, you know, off with the fairies sort of magic, but it's everyday magic, right? You know how it operates, and you are still completely fooled by it. And so again, I don't have to spell it out, but you can see how it's operating all the time around us in politics and you know, social media and fashion and, you know, everything, you know, which is about maintaining certain kinds of projections. And of course art is one way of, you know, like commenting on that. And I suppose that's why I still really love working in very, very basic ways with musical instrument. I love the artisanal, handmade aspect of playing instruments and working with really simple materials. You know, I wrote this piece for woodblock, or the piece, Matt, the double bass piece with the string in the mouth. You know, these are really, really simple, basic, cheap, available, you know, material stuff. And the way in which that can become absolutely magical through these processes of transformation, these processes of belief and then suspension of belief, really, for me, speak to kind of very deep levels of human interaction, yeah, which are so for me that stuff is very, that kind of, yeah, what I'm saying, ordinary magic is, it's very real for me. Yeah, so that's my kind of take on the ventriloquism question, Tyler.
I I love I love seeing that ordinary magic at play in your operas, because for me that's one of those day-to-day forms of like, you have to believe, because when I
Mm.
see first timers at the opera, they're all looking around like, you guys really believe this? You enjoy it? Like, we're all just sort of like willing suspension of disbelief here. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Why are they singing?
exactly.
Yeah.
That you're able to tie it into so much else in our world, I think is an interesting frame. You know, we're trained to compartmentalize our lives with something like this, right? I have my internet browser on one tab that's separate from my note section, right? I'm not thinking of them in collective spaces, collective ideas.
Mm.
But this ability for both your concepts and your music to speak to a vast array of ideas, of subject matters, um, that multivalency, I think, is really interesting for a listener. We can find so many different entry points, beyond just perhaps a program note or a title. I think for me, the work that taught me that most about your writing is The Navigator, because at any given moment, you're never just dealing with a single story, right? It's the rare operatic mind that would take the Mahabharata and put it over top of the Tristan, right?
Yeah.
And so we're seeing this kind of multivalency of narrative, and you can read it any number of ways, and I think that plays a lot in a good deal of your music.
I can't help it. I just go there. It's really hard for me to sort of, kind of whittle things down. I end up just drawing in, yeah, things from all over the place. And my explanation for it now, right, which hopefully will continue developing, is that I need to, and I talked about this in relation to orchestral work of mine called Sappho Bioluminescence. It's like, why couldn't you just stay with the Sappho? Why did you need this extra story? What's that about? But my explanation for it to myself is that I need these multiple viewpoints to, I use the word, to triangulate another concept. There's always another thing beyond it. Because it's not enough, because it's never really about just that one story. And it's why I think it goes beyond what people say. Oh, it's programmatic. It's trying to point it towards another kind of experience. And the best way I can sort of try and do that is to draw in these multiple reference points. I'm looking for that thing that's beyond description, I suppose, and in the meantime, just sort of having fun, romping around, through all these things.
There's some very musical embodiments of that too, right? You don't just try and tackle that concept within the frame of standard modern Western instruments, right? It's never just, all right, I'm going to have a standard symphony orchestra and then I'm going to try and do that. You've written for Baroque harp and for recorder, but also for like the Elysian consort, which has every sound and instrument imaginable under the sun. And I'm curious it's not a dialectic so much. Do you find yourself hearing or approaching those sounds with a conscious difference? Those sort of Baroque or Renaissance noises that like crawl through time toward us in the musical world, or
I like that. Yeah, crawl through time.
or their counterparts in our modern day experimental music, whatever you want to call it, scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, first of all, those choices very much emerge from particular players, and as you've said, a particular context, which is the Elysian ensemble, in which people, you have these musicians who are just very curious people who, are interested in looking at not just your standard harp, but also the Baroque harp. This is Marshall McGuire, or interested in not only playing the mandolin, but the sitar, or whatever, or percussionists, just kind of being very curious about all kinds of performance traditions. So my involvement with any of these instruments comes out of the performer. It's actually someone's life's work that you're connecting to and being in a conversation with. Mm-hmm. But in terms of approaching a standard orchestral instrument versus something from an earlier period or a non-Western tradition, I probably take similar approach in terms of, like seeing, okay, where are the, what are the capacities of the instrument, and it's sort of like, it's always a kind of, learning. It's an expanded orchestration kind of exercise, I suppose, where you just try and learn as much as you can about the instrument, how it sounds, but also particular techniques and how they can be further elaborated. Always looking, as I've said before, at the noise. Mm-hmm. So where are the cracks in between stable states, where things can metamorphose. Mm-hmm. So looking for those capacities in all instruments. But of course, every instrument comes with story, comes with lineages, historical lineages and performance lineages. And I'm just, kind of really absolutely still so excited about all instruments. I just think there's so much to know and so much to continue to develop. Like I'm a violinist, so that was my first kind of performance training, and so I do know stringed instruments pretty well and so on, but I just think there's so much more to discover in terms of sonic possibilities. And for instance, around harmonics, we think we already know, and many composers have explored harmonics in all kinds of ways, but I think there's so much more still, and that is incredibly exciting. And it's why that relationship with performance is so important and so invigorating, because it's like, wow, I'm sure, Emma, you're the violinist, and Robbie the cellist, and Matt the double bassist. These are instruments which are not just said and done, but I think completely can be totally renewed. I'm so inspired and kind of hopeful about all of that. Yeah,
it's refreshing to talk to a composer who is just as curious about our instruments as we are. Right? So often we get into like a rut of, okay, I know how to make this sound and I want you to make this sound. And to really speak to somebody who's just as excited and curious as all of us are every time we pick up or put in Jack's and Alex's case, put something on our instrument. We're never 100% sure what that sound is going to be. There's always that tiny margin of error, even with like an open A string, that something might happen that I'm not sure what it's going to be. And that... that's kind of the thrill of performance.
I don't know that is such a common attitude, though, because I think so much conservatory training is about beating that out of you, isn't it? It is about control and being more homogenous with your sound. I think you've sort of all got beyond that, which is to be curious about, the things that might be called mistakes. But I think I think they're also challenges and that risky space is the really exciting place. So that's great. Yeah, that's your approach.
And this was an idea that Matt brought up when we were talking about your music. In that kind of conservatory training, we're taught a concept of beauty too, right? And sometimes that beauty shows up in your music too. I'm thinking of like Weaver of Fictions. That's like that opening line is just an elegant recorder solo. There's no ifs, and, or buts about it. It's just sort of what we like, almost not what we would expect, but there's no like immediate shock of like, oh, I've never heard a recorder make that sound. Like it's the sound that a recorder makes when it's our expectation of beauty. But you also find so much sonic beauty and distortion as well. And sort of bridging this idea between like, what we're trained to think of as beautiful and what you hear as the creator as beautiful, and hope that we as listeners hear as well. I think Matt was just really interested to hear your definition and your approach to this idea of beauty.
I think I've said it before in various ways, but yeah, noise is for me is the living substance of music. Yeah, I guess I've never, probably weird, you know, in my musical formation. I didn't sort of go through this, Bach, Beethoven, and then, okay, maybe Schoenberg, and then Barrier. I sort of just loved contemporary music and experimental music right from the beginning. I just connected to those sounds. It just completely made sense to me. So yeah, I get this physical enjoyment to, you know, with noise and distortion, and I'd love to share that in my composition. Not everyone shares that, but I don't know.
And it's what we've talked this whole conversation about, right? The beauties and the immense inner understanding that we can gain from stepping aside from the human attachments, right? And the Zoom worlds, and identifying, just like you said, with noise, with the sounds that nature provides us that are enough as it is, and then their transcription into our own vocabulary. And I think that speaks on a whole really to a lot of this conversation. If it's all right with you, I have one last question for you. Okay, I have two last questions for you.
Okay.
One is a little bit more thoughtful, and one is one of our favorite, like what has come to be one of our favorite questions.
Okay.
The more thoughtful of the two being, you know, we talk about the limitations of language, but also the way in which memory and identity is passed through culture. The process of transcription is a big one, or just simply writing something out for the first time. I'm curious about your relationship to pen and paper, to the act of writing. We all commented on just the sheer beauty of your scores in their own right. Just looking at your handwriting is something to be admired. And there must be like an actual just sit with rulers and sketch things out process to it. But there's also a very histographical nature there. I just want to talk about this idea of like engraving, of transcribing.
Yes, that for me is another kind of magic. And writing, as we can see in you know, myths and stories, absolutely has this kind of status of magic. Yeah, to make a mark that symbolizes something. Clearly, you know, all text is that, right? It's, you know, it makes sound. and early reading and writing, you know, like no one read silently, people read aloud, right? And there's actually a fantastic book by Tim Ingold called Lines. I highly recommend, you know, which talks about early writing, and it's the magic of that. But yes, I mean, I have this thing. I love very simple pencil and paper. This real physical relation, you know, this hand, eye, thought, body relation. When you make a mark, and for me, when I make a mark on a piece of paper, I'm in, you know, it's already pushing back. It's not just me making the mark, but it's the mark is kind of speaking back to me. So that again is a real sort of relational thing. And there's always a shock when I see something typeset.
Yeah.
That's really weird, right? It just looks so dead to me. And of course it's necessary, and the typeset can be super elegant and lovely. And I don't do my own typesetting, I have to say. I work with a copyist. So it's a big relationship of trust as well. but yes, all those things around those kind of basic tools of composition, very old school, you know, the pencil and the paper and the eraser and the whatever. You know, I'm like Stravinsky. I have these rituals around that. You know, I like to line things up and have things in the right place, and I'm a little bit superstitious about it. So
when you sent me a copy of Boat Song and I opened it for the first time, I was like, this doesn't look like her music.
okay.
I'm so accustomed to, again, that physical relationship with your handwriting, with not really deciphering, but there's something said about the music in the fluidity of your line.
Yeah.
You don't get in a computer. It's not capable of reproducing that humanness.
Yeah. Well, it's a different kind, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah. You can bridge it, but yes, there's something about, you know, calligraphy, which is very developed in sort of Chinese and Japanese cultures, obviously. You know, where you see the dynamism of the energy, you know, in the line, which I really like. Yeah. And there's something very musical about that as well. You know, this phrasing, the moment-to-moment time aspect of that's contained in handwriting. Yeah.
Totally.
Old-fashioned, I know.
I love that idea of handwritten music as temporal. I love that.
Yeah.
On the topic of translating signs and cultural meanings, have you read anything interesting these days? What have you been reading?
What have I been reading?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have lots of things going at simultaneously. Yeah, I have to probably gain more focus in my reading. Oh God, I don't know where to start really. I have lots of unread books as well. Umberto Eco said you need to have a library of unread books. They're just as important as the ones you've read. You know, they have this kind of presence speaking to you somehow. You know, like I'm always reading poetry. I often am reading something in anthropological literature. Sorry, I like history books as well. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't make a particular recommendation right now. Yeah.
It's okay, and it speaks a lot to you and your approach to the world and your art. So I love the answer, and I think it's the perfect way to sort of round out the conversation from everything that we've talked about.
Well, thank you very much. I think we actually covered quite a lot of ground this morning. But congratulations to you all. I think it's really fantastic what you're doing. It's very inspiring to see how you're mobilizing and organizing, you know, in this collective way and kind of extending these conversations all over the world. So really, really great. Yeah.
And thank you for adding your voice to it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're awesome.
See you.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Everything But the Kitchen Sink. We hope you enjoyed it.
If you'd like to hear more, you can find all the episodes of our summer series on our YouTube channel and our website, alineaensemble.org.
Also, be sure to check out our social media profiles for more information and previews of upcoming episodes. Our handle is Alinéa Ensemble.
Please feel free to share today's episode with anybody you think might like it, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or comments.
Stay tuned for more episodes of Everything But the Kitchen Sink, released every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
And as always, we hope you are all safe and well. See you next time.